She rode through the Indian Territory like a queen through her own kingdom. Men feared her. The law barely touched her. And then, on a lonely Oklahoma road, someone decided the Bandit Queen had lived long enough. The killer was never found. Missouri, 1848. Myra Maybelle Shirley was born into a family that stood on the wrong side of the Missouri border. When the war came, her brother was a Confederate guerrilla who rode with Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson, the same circles that produced Jesse and Frank James. When the war ended and her brother died in a Union ambush, Myra Maybelle was 18, angry, and looking for a world that had room for what she had become. She found it in Texas, then in the Cherokee Nation. She married a man named Jim Reed, who was trouble from the beginning. They had a daughter named Pearl and a son named Eddie, and they lived the kind of life that moved often and quietly. Because staying in one place too long was dangerous when your husband was wanted for murder and stagecoach robbery. Jim Reed was killed in 1874, shot by a man who wanted the reward money. Myra Maybelle, already calling herself Belle, moved on. The Indian Territory, the vast tract of land in what is now Oklahoma, assigned to the 5 civilized tribes after their forced removal from the East, was a complicated place in the 1870s and 1880s. Federal law applied, technically, but enforcement required crossing hundreds of miles of difficult terrain with an understaffed marshal's office out of Fort Smith, Arkansas. For people who needed distance from the law, it was useful country. Belle understood this. In 1880 she married Sam Starr, a Cherokee man, and set up a homestead on Cherokee land along the South Canadian River. She called the place Younger's Bend, in honor of the younger brothers she had known growing up in the Jesse James orbit. Whether they had any connection to her romantically or practically was a matter of considerable rumor, mostly invented. Younger's Bend became known as a stop on the outlaw circuit. Wanted men passed through. Horses changed hands. Belle charged for the hospitality and kept quiet about the guests. Whether she actively organized criminal enterprises or simply refused to ask questions is debated. To this day, the newspapers did not debate it. They called her the Bandit Queen. A Kansas City paper ran a profile with an illustration of her riding sidesaddle with 2 pistols drawn, hair streaming, a look of wild defiance on her face. None of it was entirely accurate. Belle, who was fond of attention, did not correct it. The law caught up with her. Eventually, in the way the law always did. Not for the serious things, but for something ordinary. In 1882, Belle and Sam Starr were convicted of horse theft. Judge Isaac Parker, the famous hanging judge of the Fort Smith court, sentenced them each to 9 months of hard labor. Belle served her sentence and came home. She would later tell people it was nothing. She had survived worse. She had a way of speaking about hardship that made it sound like evidence of her own supremacy. And enough people believed her to make it useful. Sam Starr was killed in a Christmas night shooting in 1886. Belle moved through 2 more men with names and troubles of their own. She kept Younger's Bend. She raised horses. She ran her operation. She was not done yet. February 3, 1889. Belle Starr was riding home from a neighbor's house, alone on the road, 2 days before her 41st birthday. The road ran through heavy scrub timber. 2 shots hit her from behind. One in the right shoulder. One in the face. She fell from her horse and died in the road. Her daughter Pearl found her. The suspects were numerous. Belle had lived a life that made enemies the way other people made friends. A tenant farmer named Edgar Watson had recently had a dispute with her. He was arrested, tried, and acquitted. The evidence was not there. Or someone made sure it wasn't. Watson would go on to kill several more people before being shot to death by a mob in Florida 2 decades later. Her own son Eddie was also suspected. They had a difficult relationship, and he had been in the area. He denied it to the end of his life. The actual killer was never determined. The dime novel writers had her story before the body was cold. Within months she was the subject of a cheap biography that invented nearly everything. A secret Confederate spy ring. A passionate affair with Cole Younger. A gang of her own loyal men who rode at her command. Almost none of it was true. None of it needed to be. The Bandit Queen was already bigger than any one woman could be. Pearl Starr lived for years in Fort Smith, running a house that was not a house. She kept a photograph of her mother on the wall. Belle on horseback, wearing a black velvet riding habit and a wide-plumed hat, looking exactly like the queen she had named herself. Pearl named her own daughter Flossie. She did not name her Belle. There was a point to that. Probably. What Belle Starr actually was is harder to locate than the legend. She was educated. She could play piano and had received more schooling than most women of her era in the territory. She was shrewd. She was connected to men of violence without, as far as the record shows, committing much violence herself. She kept a home at the edge of law for people who needed exactly that. She charged for it. She was convicted once and served her time. She lived longer than most of the men she knew. And she died in the road 2 days before her birthday. Shot twice from behind. And no one was ever charged. The killer took the secret. The legend took the rest.